All right, welcome to this week's live office hours. We got a lot to talk about. There's a lot of I'm gonna call it chaos in this space,
Yeah.
which is pretty crazy. So we're gonna kind of kick it off that way. I have a bunch of stuff to kind of share, and we have a cool announcement, not today, but in the coming days, some new cool stuff coming to Aura users, which I'm very excited about, Q4 related. So I'm gonna start this off kind of almost like a news kind of reel, if you will. Let me just make sure I'm getting the right one here. Should be this guy. Perfect. Okay, cool. So looking at my favorite tool, Perplexity, yeah, any new news related to Amazon suspending third-party Amazon seller accounts, any patterns emerging? And yeah, there actually is. So one, a lot of policy violations, performance issues, certainly. And you kind of have to put this into context and understand like there's basically like three variations of this and really like three escalations. So you've got like deactivation, suspension, and then a ban. Most people are, as far as I'm aware, getting suspended more so than deactivated or banned. Banned's like a hardcore thing. We really don't see that often. So it's interesting. Like we have to ask ourselves, like, what is causing this, right? Because if we look at some data from Marketplace Pulse, 61% of units sold are coming from 3PLs, right? Now that includes brands on the platform. Like basically, if you're not aware, 1P, so 1PL is basically brands selling to Amazon wholesale, and then Amazon selling it on their behalf. 3P is private label, everything, right? So still huge number. This used to be touted in the 50 percentage points, but this has definitely started to increase over the past like few years. So it's a big portion of the business, which is absolutely crazy. But you're starting to see some interesting policy issues come about. So I think what's happening is there's a big amount of policy pressure on Amazon, and Amazon's having to react to it, right? So there was a bunch of counterfeit lawsuits that we saw not too long ago that affected a bunch of people. But now the U.S. Product Safety Commission is attempting to reclassify Amazon as a distributor of goods, which could expose Amazon to liability for third-party products sold on the Amazon marketplace, which means they're going to be more strict, right? Now they're on the line, so to speak. It's not this free for all thing. And this has always changed, right? This has gotten more like this over time. And I've said this for probably the past decade. Like, this is a maturing industry. It will evolve, just like Walmart will, right? Like, Walmart's still early in their marketplace, like 3PL side of things. But what's going to happen is they too will get hit with some kind of regulations, class action lawsuits, all these things. You get big enough, these things just kind of come to you. Um, so we have a lot of these Section 3s that are coming about. A lot of brands. I mean, Fisher Price, I think, just got hit. Revlon, certainly. There's a few categories that are getting hit pretty hard. But another thing that got released a few days ago, I think it was 2 days ago, an update for product bundling policies for consumables. So what a lot of people previously were doing, which made a lot of sense, was a big strategy for a long time, which is like this private label bundling kind of concept, right? You buy something wholesale or even RA that's not necessarily profitable by itself, or it's highly competitive, and you pair that and you bundle it with something that is a little bit less easy to recreate. And now, for all intents and purposes, you have a private label listing, right? You can run the whole listing, choose pricing, run PPC ads, all that good stuff, and it was totally fine. Now you can't really do that. They are in theory stating that they're giving a grace period for ones already created, but there's a few things in the seller forums that are showing that's not necessarily true. A month ago, somebody got deactivated doing this before the policy was ever announced. So for context here, what essentially the policy change is, if you purchased from the manufacturer or the brand a bundled thing, like it was bundled from the manufacturer, that is okay. If you're taking individual items, even of the same brand, and creating your own version of a bundle, that is not okay. So a lot's changing. Is this a horrible thing? Not necessarily. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen, am I? Hold on. Casey, can you see my screen?
No, you had it up before, but it did go away about a minute or
It
two
just
ago.
went. Okay, that's fine. So basically, a lot is shifting, which again, kind of scary, but there's some kind of rumors right now that this is a Q4 play, meaning Amazon's going to be under a lot of microscopes during Q4. With the added regulatory pressure, it would make sense for them to do a lot of restrictions to avoid any potential issues. And then going into Q1, relaxing those policies because they're not under a microscope. That's a theory. It's a rumor. Who knows? Seems rational, but we don't know. And, you see this a lot on Twitter, right? People saying, well, Amazon doesn't care about the small seller, doesn't care about X, Y, and Z, or, I've heard it from both ends of the spectrum. Amazon can't stand or doesn't support small sellers. Amazon doesn't like the big sellers. What's true here? I think what is actually true, what's the law called? Occam's razor, right? Basically, like, the simplest answer is probably what's true, which is they're under a lot of regulatory pressure, and there are enough sellers creating bad scenarios that is forcing Amazon's hand, which is affecting good sellers. This happens. Is that right? No. Is Amazon's reaction to that, if that is true, right? Yeah, kind of, right? They have to protect what they have. And what does this mean as a seller? I think at the end of the day, and I've always said this, even for the past decade, like, it's Amazon's house. You play by their rules or you don't play at all. So it's kind of like the FBA fees increasing every year. Every time it gets announced, everybody's like, oh, it's done. It's not done. They do it every year. It's a changing effect of things. Do these policies affect your business? Yes. But this is important to understand. If you're solely selling on Amazon, you have what's called platform risk. That risk, in a lot of cases, is worth it because the reward is much greater than that risk. But you don't have control over a lot of things, right? You can't control demand, right? It's not your platform. You can't run you can run external ads and stuff like that, but as a reseller, you're really not doing much of that. And so you have to be adaptable. And this is something I was talking about in last week's blog post, like the era of the exponential seller, right? As I dive deeper into all the AI stuff and cutting edge tech and see how that, could, apply to Amazon sellers, one of the things I mentioned in that is this adaptability. We're, as humans, not really good at rapid change. We're really good at slow change because we can adapt over time. But we're not in that world anymore. Things are exponentially changing, right? Like, in a good example here is like the rate of models being released, like AI models. We're compressing the time between releases and massively increasing the performance of each release. So, I was talking with somebody about this, and they're like, how do you build an AI software right now sitting on top of these models? And I was like, I think a lot of people are actually struggling to do that because if you freeze time in the capabilities right now, yeah, it's easy to ideate and create some awesome ideas. But if you know that in 3 months, the model could do the thing that you're building, but you don't know, it's like a 50-50, right? It's like, well, agents right now is the big thing. A lot of people creating agent frameworks, basically like tying a bunch of large language models together to create this like pipeline of like workflows and all this cool stuff, which is like awesome. But the models themselves might be able to do that in the next 6 months. So a lot of these agent-based companies are starting to get heads up, from what I've heard, that's just like, hey, heads up, we're going to release something that basically does what you do in the model, not sitting on top of the model, which is like foundationally different. So I say that to say that kind of change is also happening in the Amazon space. There's so much complexity to the Amazon ecosystem, and you need to position and build your business in such a way that it is easy to navigate these things. Doesn't make it like non-painful, but you do want to get to a point where, you're in a boat and you can easily change directions, however that makes sense. I know one person on Twitter, we were kind of, commenting because I had a Twitter post this morning that was basically like, hey, a lot of things are changing. And like, from what we're seeing, it's mainly smaller sellers getting hit with these deactivations and suspensions. I think it would be not wrong to just assume, well, because it's mainly from at least what we're seeing in our data, smaller sellers getting hit with this. Amazon doesn't care about small sellers. I think if you go deeper into it, like we have, you find that actually smaller sellers are making big mistakes that they're not aware of. And that is putting them more at risk. Your more established sellers understand the risk, how to avoid those things, how to do it right. And somebody getting started and still trying to figure out this whole business model is going to make mistakes. And that just puts you at risk. So I think, and again, I keep saying, I've said this for years, because I have, but you cannot treat this like a side hustle anymore. It has to legit be a business. You have to be building a business, keeping records, like all the boring stuff matters now, because that's how you're de-risking yourself. And that doesn't guarantee safety, right? One of the seller forum posts was like, we have everything. We spend $1 million a year on Coke products directly from a bottler. We have authorizations to do everything, all the paperwork, and Amazon wants this one particular thing that is hard for us to get. And they didn't give us a heads up, no phone call, nothing. Deactivated everything. And I've got bills to pay. I've got payroll, family. And they're working with their B2B business reps that are just like, we're going to see what we can do, but no promises. So it's not a guarantee, but anything you can do to take that percentage of risk down, the better. It's never going to be zero because of that platform risk, right? But if you can lower that to as low as you can, that's good. That lets you sleep a little bit better at night. But it's one of those things where a few bad apples can change things for the good people. But that's out of our control, unfortunately. That's kind of just the reality of it.
Yeah, and like we've talked about a few times on these office hours, the lawsuit over the summer covered a whole range of products. It was anything from like baby blankets to, I think, certain health supplements, things like that. So in addition to making sure that you're checking all the boxes that you need to sell any products, if you are selling specific products, baby products are going to have a whole slew of rules and regulations around them. Health supplements, anything that may be a little bit more just hands-on for a user, it could affect someone's health or all sorts of things. These are now the things that you have to be thinking about and making sure that, hey, I'm not just selling a packet or a can of tennis balls. I'm selling whatever it may be, making sure that there's all these other processes that may be involved and making sure you're covering yourself there. But yeah, it does seem like it is a trend for smaller sellers who may be missing some steps in their initial setup. Obviously, the larger folks who are doing more revenue on a monthly basis may have more established processes, things already kind of taken care of there. But yeah, definitely not an ideal time and potentially unfair, but I mean, Amazon has to kind of protect themselves when it comes to these things. They don't want to get hit with another lawsuit. And like we've said, unfortunately, when we're playing on their playground, we have to kind of play by their rules. But yeah, if there's any trends or anything that anyone notices, as always, feel free to come into chat on the website and things like that. We're starting to compile some data to see if we can discern any patterns. So if you do have any insights, definitely let us know, and we'll kind of continue to assess this kind of ongoing and evolving policy situation, if you will.
Yeah. And for the record, we're noticing mainly smaller sellers getting hit with like the Section 3 stuff. The changes to the bundling policy and things of that nature will affect much larger sellers who are doing this at scale. So it's not that just one segment of sellers is getting hit proportionally more than the other. It's just they're getting hit differently. And so that creates a kind of rocky boat. But I'm a big fan of like Stoic philosophy, and I'm gonna get meta for a second, but there's like the yin yang, the seasonality, right? And so in like Stoic philosophy, there's this concept of winter and harvest, right? And so if you're in a winter season, well, what comes next? The harvest season, which is the good season. But the inverse is also true. When you're in a really frothy harvest season, guess what might be around the corner? That could be winter. So you always want to kind of keep things in balance. And that's what that philosophy tries to do, is just say like, listen, everything's amazing right now. That could change. I need to be prepared for that. Or, hey, it's really bad right now, but that doesn't mean it's going to be pervasive or permanent. It's not going to stay that way necessarily, which is why I wanted to highlight, the theory that in Q1 this kind of changes, if not reverses. So this is not a reason necessarily to freak out. It's just a reason to kind of just like take a step back and think and be like, all right, cool. Like, what does this mean for me? How do I need to adapt? And then just go and execute. I think a lot of sellers tend to overreact to these kind of changes because they're like, oh my gosh, everything, like now the boat's going away. There's always this weird anxiety for sellers of like, when does it die, right? When does Amazon just not be a thing anymore? We've been having this since I became a seller a decade plus ago. And we're still here and still crushing it. But it's different than the way it used to look. And that's okay. So see John here. Any recommendations for a company to help with suspensions? I've not used one. If I'm not mistaken, what is it? Riverbend Consulting. Let me look this up here. I've heard of these guys quite often. It's riverbendconsulting.com. Again, not vouching for them. I've never used them, but I have heard the name come up quite a bit. I think e-commerce Chris also does this, if I'm not mistaken. But you have plenty of options to look at. See Carlos. Hi there. What would be a sustainable model for online arbitrage in your opinion? New seller here, 5 months. Sustainable. I think the business model matters far less in this conversation. Like you really want to make sure you have enough documentation because a lot of what's happening from what I'm seeing is like IP complaints or counterfeit complaints. So make sure you have some documentation of like, here's where I bought it and that's an authorized dealer. This is not counterfeit inventory. That's the kind of stuff you want. So you want your receipts, you want your orders, the emails, all that good stuff like stored. I'm a big fan of basically creating a Gmail filter. So you can basically say if it contains whatever keywords common, just move it to a folder called orders or receipts. That way they're out of your way, but like they're still there and easily searchable. You can find them, dig them up whenever you need to. I think that's going to be really helpful for a lot of people. But again, I don't think it's like a OARA wholesale PL problem. I think it's just how the macro landscape is changing for sellers right now. So I think the biggest thing for staying sustainable is having that documentation, which again, to my previous comment of like, it's the boring kind of aspect of it, but it's the boring stuff that protects you later. And that's what's important here, in my opinion.
Yeah, just a good reminder to just check your work, right? I was never good at showing my work in math classes in high school, and Amazon is now going to want to see how you're getting to the point where you're selling those products. So just a good reminder to kind of just double check everything that you've been doing, making sure that you're not missing any steps.
Mm-hmm. And one good strategy here is like, look at all the reasons people are getting Section 3s and suspensions and things of that nature. And then just say, okay, well, how would like red team your business and be like, all right, let me try to basically like suspend myself and find reasons to do it. And then you go and plug those gaps, right? So if you're like, oh, well, if they ask me for proof of purchase, I don't have that. Okay, fix it, right? This is what's so important is like, you look for reasons why you could be suspended, not for reasons why you couldn't. This is the same analogy as you should look for reasons not to buy inventory versus reasons to buy inventory because there's a bias. It's always like, well, it's great. It looks awesome because you have a bias. You want something. But if you flip that, you inverse it, all of a sudden you start to see the red flags that you were previously avoiding and not really noticing. But if you find the red flags before Amazon does and you fix those, so you, again, reducing that percentage of risk, you're in a far better scenario than the average seller because most sellers are not doing that, in my opinion. So you have a suspended for Section 3 violation and no one could explain what caused it. It took over 2 weeks to get rectified and still no reason as to why it happened. Been selling for over 7 years, so it's kind of surprising. And see, that's what I'm saying. That's what's so difficult about this is there are some clear policy changes, things of that nature. But even some of the policy changes, like the bundling one that went into effect or was announced, should I say, 2 days ago, there's a seller forum post of somebody like months ago getting deactivated, the Coke seller. So it's one of those things where it's not perfectly clear cut, and nothing in Amazon ever is. It's rarely, hey guys, here's what's going to happen. Here's how it's going to happen. Here's when it's going to happen. Here's what to do to avoid it. You got 3 months. No, they're like, actually, we kind of started to implement this 3 months ago, but didn't really mention it. And who knows why that's the case? It could be completely different teams working on different policy deadlines and things of that nature. It's hard to tell because obviously we're not in it, but yeah, sometimes there is no clear answer, which is kind of frustrating. If you tell me the problem, I can usually fix it. But if you can't tell me what the problem is, I don't know what to do. And again, it's a really kind of tough scenario. See, I had to do an identity verification. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot more of these actually. Like schedule the call, verify yourself. Again, reduce it down. What happened to Amazon that would force their hand? It's all these policy pressures that they're getting externally. They're going to protect themselves. I mean, listen, we went through, we got large enough as a software company years ago, and they reached out and said, hey, you're large enough. We're going to do a security audit with Deloitte. And it took us like 3 months to work through everything. And, it was nice for us because, we're verified, and so like we're authorized. I mean, we were authorized as the developer before, but now it's like a different type of stamp of approval, which is amazing from a security perspective. But Amazon, doesn't explicitly say this, but it's kind of clear that they're like, listen, we're just protecting ourselves here so that if anything were to happen, we can come to the table and say, well, we did an audit and everything checked out and they were good. And we did our due diligence, and if they were bad actors, that's on them. I think they're doing the same kind of philosophy and thinking with sellers. So, yeah, I think probably over the next few months, this might continue. But again, you got to be adaptable. You got to be able to say, cool, whatever comes up, and I'm going to deal with it and keep moving on. Super important. Denny, for someone starting wholesale on Amazon in 2024, which tool would you recommend for the most accurate data? Smart Scout, Keepa, Jungle Scout, and apart from Aura, what other tools would you strongly recommend for new sellers? I'm kind of counterintuitive here. I don't think wholesale's mainly a software problem. There's a big difference between being effective and efficient. Software makes you more efficient in a lot of cases. So what a lot of wholesale people try to do is add software to make them more effective, but that doesn't work. So if you're not good at sourcing on wholesale, in other words, you're ineffective and you try to add software onto it, you become efficiently ineffective. So effectiveness comes first and then you make it efficient later. So I actually recommend not using a ton of tools outside of some data analysis stuff. So like Jungle Scout's really good. I love the sales estimator. That was helpful for me because I had that checklist. I wrote about this on the Aura blog, basically my checklist for purchasing wholesale inventory. I wanted to know I can move at least 30 units on average myself with the current number of competitors. So I basically throw the BSR in there, the category, it spit out a number. I divide it by the number of active sellers plus myself. And if that was greater than 30, I got a green light. I think that's great. DS Amazon Quick View is really nice too. At least the way I source, it helped me not have to click into every single listing and go basically deeper. It would surface things up like how many sellers are on this listing? Is Amazon on this listing? What's the BSR? All that good stuff. So I could see that looking at a massive directory of products without having to go into each one. That one's good. That one's great. And then what would you strongly recommend for new sellers? There's a few things, actually. There's a few tools that are performance-based. Really one, like I think having reimbursement service in place day zero makes a lot of sense because it doesn't cost you anything. It's just it's on performance, right? They're going to take 10 to 20% of whatever they recover for you. It's just nice to kind of have that set up so you don't forget it. And it's just like working in the background. I think that's fantastic. And obviously, like accounting, I know, boring, but please do good accounting. Like you don't think it's that important until you have to do it, and then it's pure chaos and you can't catch up. That's frustrating. Don't do that. I've been checking out Finaloop, and it's actually really cool. It integrates with Amazon and all that good stuff. That's an interesting company. Again, I haven't used them as a seller, but I know a lot of people are starting to talk about them now. I wrote about them on the blog not too long ago. But if you search Go Aura financial software, I think is what it would pop up. There's a blog post where I break down kind of what you should have in place. But yeah, software comes later. I made this mistake too, using Jungle Scout for sourcing and all these different things. And it's kind of like hiring a VA to help you source when you can't source. A lot of people use VAs like silver bullets, and they're just like, well, I'm not good at it, so I'll go hire somebody who can just do it for me. But that's kind of like coaching a baseball team when you don't understand the sport. You don't really know how to define success. You can't create realistic KPIs. You don't know when they're doing something wrong. You're just saying go and like hoping for the best. Hoping's not good. Like there's a reason why I did support for the first 2.5 years as a founder before bringing on Finn and Casey, is like I can now speak that language and understand what is realistic and what is not, and like how we should do things and not do things. I can manage a little bit better. So it just makes it better for everybody else. But software can give you that false sense of productivity. And wholesale for me is not a efficiency based game. It's purely an effectiveness based game. And a good example of that, at one point when I was actively selling, there was a lot of people coming out being like, well, I can send 400 emails to wholesale leads a day. Okay, cool. It sounds nice. What's your conversion rate? Well, the open rate, so opening an account, was 10%. But what they're not realizing is they're not doing enough vetting at the front end. And so they're opening up 10% of those accounts, right? So 40, but hardly any of them are actually profitable. And so it looks nice, but you're not really making progress. Whereas I knew that if I cold called 10 brands, I would open 40% open rate, and one out of those 10 one out of the four would be profitable enough with at least one SKU. So you got to be able to track your conversions, and that's not something you can passively do. I had a spreadsheet, right? On the day, how many did I call? How many accounts did I open? How many of those accounts actually were profitable? And then that lets you know, okay, well, if I'm opening up a bunch of accounts, let's say I got an 80% open rate, but I got a 2% conversion to those that are actually profitable. That tells you have a targeting problem. You're looking at the wrong brands, distributors, suppliers, what have you. But the inverse can also be true, right? I don't have a huge open rate. I got a 20% open rate, but 50% of those are going to be profitable. Cool, that math checks out. And then you can reverse engineer the math. Like, it's really a sales game. And if you understand your numbers, it will tell you what to get better at. If you suck at opening accounts, that's fine, because we all are when we get started. That lets you know, okay, I need to go learn how to do that better. I need to learn how to handle objections and opening the conversation and shifting the person's perspective of me, all these different things. You get that locked down. And so for me, because wholesale is less a transaction-based business and more of a relationship-based business, the analysis and all that kind of stuff is the easy part. The hard part is actually opening the accounts, and that's just doing the work, right? There's no software that's going to do it for you quite yet. We got good AI SDRs and stuff now, but I don't think they're at a point where the average Amazon seller is going to get tons of value from them. That will probably come next year. I just rambled a lot on wholesale, but it's an area that I'm very passionate about and have experience. But I think the way it's traditionally taught misses the point of what you're really doing. And if we can say, hey, it's not this veiled thing, what's behind the veil, it's actually this, and that's just sales. That lets you now go and learn the skill of sales, because you're not learning wholesale. You're buying inventory. It's the same thing.
Right.
But the big delta there is the skill set of sales. And if you crack that, which is not hard, it's uncomfortable, but you can do it, you do much better with wholesale.
Yeah, and I think it's when it comes to using different softwares and subscriptions and things, like you said, there's two main reasons for that: effectiveness and efficiency. But getting into different softwares and platforms too early can be a problem for a couple reasons. One, it gives you one more thing you need to learn when you're still trying to learn everywhere else. And then secondly, if you're using a tool, tools are designed to solve specific problems. platforms. So if you're
Right.
creating your process while using a specific tool, you're going to tailor your process to that tool, and it may not be the most effective process. So I always recommend, whether it's Amazon or anything you're doing, to create your own effective process first, and then find tools that fit your process.
Yes.
Even here with Aura, I mean, we're both effective and efficient, but you need to know how you'd like to reprice your items, what works for you. Obviously, we have our own recommendations and things that work really well for a majority of listings, but your own listings may be unique. You may need to, or you may know that you need to reprice a little bit further down to win the buy box or whatever those specific scenarios may be. And we just provide you the tool that lets you create those rules and automate that. But
Yeah.
with every platform, even Aura ourselves, we have our own limitations. So kind of having a platform in place before you have an effective process can really limit you and kind of put a ceiling on your overall performance, when you could do it a little bit more manually, find what works well, scale it, and then start to bring in those tools and platforms that can help speed things up for you, make certain areas more effective. So yeah, it is a complex world, and I don't think necessarily adding software into that equation I think adding it in too early can overcomplicate things when you can focus on other areas and then adapt as different problems and things work, things don't, things go from there.
Ari Meisel has a really good framework for this called OAO. And this is the sequence you want to go through when looking at a process and speeding things up. The first O is optimization. We're not automating anything. We're not outsourcing anything. We're making the process as optimized and effective as possible. Once we've done that, then we look at it and say, okay, well, what then could be automated, which is the A, and then what is left over, we look at and say, what can be outsourced or delegated? I really don't like using the term outsourced anymore. I think it's got a bad connotation, but what can be delegated to someone else? So when we launched the Wholesale Made Easy podcast, I literally went up to a whiteboard with the whole thing. Like, here's the whole complicated thing that needs to get done. I said, okay, cool. Let's walk through this process. Well, I'm doing this thing twice in different areas. So let me just reduce that down. Okay, so I removed 25% of the steps already. Now what can I automate? Okay, well, I can use Zapier for this and Slack for that. Okay, I'll do that. Now what's left over? Well, the only thing left over was to record the podcast, which I personally had to do, and audio editing, which I actually found somebody to do for us. So I took this whole complicated thing and reduced it down to all I need to do is record the podcast, upload it into Slack, and I'm done. But I didn't start there, right? I optimized the process first. Dylan, we can see your passion for wholesale when you speak. You still have the fire. All the best. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, I miss doing it, to be honest. Because it's one of those things when you finally understand what it really is that nobody's talking about, a light bulb comes on and you go, oh, we're using this language, but it's really just this. And then you're like, cool, everybody's going to go study this one little isolated concept. I'm going to go study the industry that is sales, and I'll get dramatically better at it. And I did, which is so funny. I try to tell sellers, study information outside of Amazon. Look at how e-commerce runs. Look at how sales orgs are built. Like, go study things. Go find the best practices. Here's a good example. Find best practices in other industries that could be applicable to our industry that is not being done. If you look at why Aura stands out, one, there's a lot of reasons, but from a product perspective, we follow best practices from startups, from the tech world. Amazon software is its own isolated small concept, and they tend to not follow those best practices. So it's interesting, by broadening our perspective, we can say, well, what are startups, cutting edge startups doing? What tools are they using? How are they building? How are they building teams? All these different things. And we take those frameworks and apply it here, and all of a sudden it's night and day. You can do that in any industry, right? This is why I'm such a fan of just geeking out over the randomest things. Like, I loved the lean manufacturing concept, Toyota production system. That one concept allowed me to co-found a prep center. And I didn't have any experience with it, but we built it using that framework, and it's been hyper scalable. Okay, well, that's cool. That's one concept, right? We took from manufacturing to prep centers. That's crazy. But you can do the exact same thing. So I think language matters more than people realize. There's a quote, I forget who was by, I think I saw it on Twitter, but it was like, language dictates or limits your reality. So if you go into a new industry, if I go into CPG, right, consumer packaged goods, I don't understand that world. So there are things that I cannot actually go and learn because I don't have the language to look it up. I don't know it exists. But as you start to learn the language, you go, oh, I've never heard that before. Let me go learn that. And then that gives you another branch over here and another branch over here. That's how you're able to learn really fast. But if you're staying in this isolated concept of I'm an Amazon seller, that is going to limit the knowledge you can gain and apply. And I think that's a massive competitive advantage. I think it's huge leverage for everyone. Sorry, I'm jacked right now. This is good. See, regarding the reimbursement service, have you heard about my refund guy from my Amazon guy? Any you recommend? Again, when I was a seller, I was using Refunds Manager. It's like super old school now. I know a lot of people like Getida. I like Getida as a team. We hang out with them at conferences. I've not used their product as a seller because I haven't been a seller in a number of years, but I do like their team. I think their team's pretty awesome. So I will say that. Stephen Pope's also awesome. I've talked to him a lot. So I'm not going to give any hard recommendations, but I think both those teams are fantastic. So just choose whatever makes the most sense for you. So it's interesting, right? We're talking about how things are rapidly evolving and changing, but at the same time, some of the foundational stuff is still true, right? A lot of people are trying to find a shortcut for things like wholesale, buying through WhatsApp and all kinds of crazy nonsense. And like, well, it's easier. Yes, but you're avoiding the foundational principles that, one, give you a more sustainable business, and two, give you a more protectable business. These two things are so important. And that's applicable to every industry, right? That every version of being a seller, OA, RA, wholesale, private label, you can mess all of them up, but there are foundational principles to building those businesses that will just always be true. The subtle tactics and things of how certain things work, like PPC ads, what works today versus 2 years ago, yes, those will change. But that's just the surface of the iceberg, right? If you look at an iceberg, what you see is like a fraction of what it actually is under the water. And it's such a good analogy because what's beneath the water, that's your foundation. That's the depth of things. Those are the principles, the best practices and stuff that if you follow will have you build a successful, scalable business. And sometimes it's going to feel like you are growing slower, and you might be, but you really got to get away from this, like, well, I do 100 grand my first 30 days as an Amazon seller. So who cares? You're 30 days into running a business. What does that have to do with anything? It sounds nice, but are you going to be here in 3 years? Right? Or did you do something you probably shouldn't have done to make that happen for your own ego and for social validation? And now you're suspended 2 months later, or you got banned. Congratulations. You looked awesome for 30 days and now you're banned from Amazon. What now? You're going to go get a job again? Who cares, right? You got to start thinking about the longevity of what you're building. You want something that is resilient, something that is anti-fragile to a certain degree. And that is a harder thing to build. But this kind of goes hand in hand with my recommendation. Like, I don't think you should be outsourcing as much as you are. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be delegating. And my classification between the two is, if I'm building a team, I don't care where somebody lives. That's not the point. They can live in the Philippines. That's not a problem. I don't want VAs. I want team members, right? I want people that are actually full-time focused on helping us build the thing we're trying to achieve. I want all their brain power. Yeah, for little things like check my email, sure, whatever, who cares? AI can do that now anyways. So there's no moat there, but it is different. It is very different. And to find those kinds of people, you're probably paying a lot more than the $8 an hour in the Philippines. And again, that's fine. But I would argue that, and we see this now at Aura, like a team of 6 can outcompete a team with 50 people. There's something there, and it allows us to be nimble. It allows us to move really fast, not have bloated stuff, all these different things. And it's just a different philosophy, right? But I think as a founder, as a business owner, you need to be thinking strategically like this. and asking these questions, because what I'm saying right now might be actually wrong for what you're trying to build. Great, don't listen to me here. Go, like, use first principles, understand what really makes sense for you, and go and build that thing. But I feel like a lot of sellers that I talk to are not being intentional about how they're building the thing that they want. They're just trying to get sale after sale after sale. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you're missing the thought process of, like, are you building this right? Are you building this sustainably? Do you understand your numbers, your KPIs? Like, okay, you want to get to 8 figures. How long is that going to take you? Well, I don't know. Well, look at your numbers. Let's extrapolate it. It's going to take you 12 years based on your numbers. Is that acceptable to you? Yeah, I'm good with that. Okay, cool. Forget the conversation. No, you want to do that in 24 months? Okay, cool. Here's what's got to change. Like, it's all math, right? That's what's so funny about it. All business is just math, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's all about getting that data and figuring out how to crunch it down and scale it up, man. Yeah,
that's it. So any other questions? I know we got about 20 minutes here, which is good, but happy to dive deeper into anything else. I'm just kind of jamming, having fun. Happy to go deeper into, like, these bundle policy changes, the regating that's occurring, because it just seems like every day we're getting a whole another brand getting gated, but it doesn't seem like it's everyone, which is interesting. Like Lego started to get locked down, but not for everyone. There's another one. Was it Revlon? No, it was a different, I think it was a beauty product brand. A lot of people getting gated on. I know some people who are not getting gated on that, at least yet. That could change. So it doesn't seem like a blanket thing, but it's rolling out and it's very high volume. So, take that with a grain of salt. Kind of bad timing, right? It's funny because, like, we had the port strike, which luckily got delayed until end of Q4. Thanks for that. So now we just have a pending doom there. And then all the gating and the policy changes, and, like, Q4 it's Murphy's Law, right? If it can go crazy, it probably will. It is just kind of interesting that it's all occurring around the same, like, Super Bowl moment for sellers. And I'm sure that's frustrating, but keep in mind that whole concept of, like, winter versus harvest months. Like, we're just entering into a short-term winter here, but trust me, as we get closer to the actual holidays, you're going to be fine. But you still need to be strategic and be, again, red teaming your business and understanding where do I have risk and how can I reduce that.
Yeah, and I would also recommend, I mean, obviously with all these deactivations, we're still trying to discern different patterns. Obviously, Dylan just mentioned certain brands being gated and whatnot.
Yeah.
I would lean on those communities to see if there's any, product categories that might be smart to avoid right now. I know we're still kind of making sure that we're sourced up for Q4, but you don't want to continue to do so and then get hit with the deactivation as we get closer to that liftoff date. So,
right.
A lot of different good communities out there. Like we've talked about, it is a much more open business, if you will, where people are willing to share what's working, share what's not working. So definitely tap into that and take advantage of, other folks or communities that may be a little bit more seasoned or have a little bit more experience, especially if you're going through your first Q4. Want to make sure that you're set up for success and don't get the rug pulled out from underneath you at any point.
Yeah. And I think this is a lot of the frustration sellers are having with these changes and these gating, because you're kind of pushed as a seller to get your inventory in, get it in before logistics basically come to a stop during peak season. And so everybody was pushing and pushing and pushing. And then it's like, well, yes, but these are not okay anymore. It's like, all right, well, like, we're kind of pushing and pulling around the same time. Not great timing here, right? Like, if you want to do that in Q1, have fun, but, like, leading up to Q4, where it's like, now we're putting fuel on the fire, that is frustrating. And I think that's an appropriate emotion to have given the circumstances. But again, you always have to keep in mind, this is Amazon's house, not yours. Things can change rapidly, and I think it's good to have some contingency plans. Yeah. And this is something we've talked about previously on the office hours, is like, Walmart's becoming more of a thing. And where in previous years, I recommended to not jump on other channels until you fully maximized the potential on Amazon. Once you've capped that, then sure, go look elsewhere for growth. I think now it's less of a adding more growth and more de-risking the platform. And, unfortunately, what's so interesting is, in a lot of ways, some sellers that are Section 3'd are being kind of forced to go to Walmart and create an account there. And so but think about that, right? Like, would Amazon intentionally do that? No. So, like, in a way, you kind of have a weird level of empathy or understanding, which is like, okay, well, why would Amazon do that? Well, somebody's probably forcing their hand. And this is why my mind goes to the whole policy pressure stuff. I don't think they want to do that. They want you on the platform. They get fees from you. They love that. They don't want you to sell anywhere else. But if they're getting this pressure, and the second order effect of that is you go join Walmart, they probably have an understanding that is, well, once you're reactivated, you're going to come back because Walmart can't beat our demand, period. That could change, but I don't think it will for a while. So worst case, you become multi-channel. Still not ideal, still not great, but that's a thing that they probably are willing to accept given their external pressure. And it's weird, right? It's so easy for sellers to just jump on like Amazon hates us. It's like, I don't think that's the case. And all the experiences I've had have told me that is not true. But you do have to keep in mind how big a company that is, how much pressure they have externally. It's class action lawsuit after class action lawsuit, different regulatory agencies trying to change all kinds of things for them in real time. And they're getting forced to do a lot of stuff that they probably would not otherwise do. And that's tough. That's a really tough scenario. So I think more so we need to be trying to work hand in hand with Amazon, and instead of like guilting them or they're the wolf in sheep clothing kind of concept. It's more like, okay, like they're in this bucket with us, and like, what can I do to like stay through this with them and like, maybe help in any way I can. How are you going to help Amazon? I don't know, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like we're basically in the same boat is what I'm trying to say, right? This is not their boat versus my boat. We're going to war. We're in the same boat, but there is another boat, which is the external stuff, that is trying to change our direction here. They're trying to change our sales in real time. We don't really love it, but listen, we're in this together. You know what I mean? Like, I don't really like having this whole like anti-Amazon things. Like, your entire business is based on Amazon and exists because of Amazon. Like, let's kind of keep that in mind here. It's like, you can hate Amazon all you want, but if you're still selling on Amazon, you don't hate them that much. And we do need to kind of check ourselves as sellers every now and then, just be like, all right, weird timing. I'll look into it, try to understand what's happening. But again, that's strategy, right? If you can kind of see what's happening behind the scenes and read a bit into that, you start to understand more, and that can help you navigate what's to come. Because if you think it's going to get worse and you have a good justification for that to get worse because of the news or what you're seeing, okay, maybe, re-protect your business a little bit deeper, or pad your bank account in case something happens. It breaks my heart when I hear a seller be like, well, I got Section 3 and I've been down for a month, I'm out of business. 30 days? It only took 30 days for you to be done. No, like, just like you should have a personal emergency fund, you should have a business emergency fund. Look at all your consistent things, labor, everything, payroll, all of it. How much does that cost on average? Great, have 3 to 6 months of that in the bank. Is that less efficient because you're not spending it on inventory? Yeah. But once you have an asset that is valuable to you, you now have to understand, I also have to protect it. And if you got 3 months of cash in the bank and it takes them a month to get you reactivated, you're like, yeah, that sucked. But like, I missed out on a lot of sales, and like, I had to dip into my emergency fund, but I exist. And this is, again, a big best practice from the startup world. Just don't die, right? If you could still be in business tomorrow, that's another opportunity to solve these big problems. And for all you know, it could take 3 days. And you're like, wow, I was really prepared for 3 months and I was ready for it. And it took 3 days and I'm back up and running. We're good here. I weathered that storm. But I don't think a lot of sellers are thinking through that lens of like, I have an asset, I need to now protect it. We do that here. We're like, hey, just in case, we got everybody's salaries 3 to 6 months. Do we think we can solve that problem in 3 to 6 months? Yeah, we could probably solve it in two to 3 weeks. So it's a good thing to do. But listen, in a capital intensive business, it's hard to want to do that and just look at cash sitting there and be like, but I could buy inventory. Yes. You could also lose your business. There's something about like the opportunity of peace of mind that does start to matter. Should you do that day one? No. But as you start to have more consistency, especially when you're working on this full time, whatever you pay yourself salary wise, 3 months in the business account, just in case.
Yeah. Live to fight another day. That's sometimes the name of the game.
Yeah. And listen, if you got 3 months personal runway, 3 months business runway, you have 6 months. I think you could sort that out in 6 months, right? You want as many at bats as possible, right? You want to know that I could weather a 30, 60, 90-day storm and come out. I won't be thriving, but I'll still be here. Awesome, right? And this is the big difference between playing short-term games and long-term games. I want you guys to be playing long-term games here. And that means you need to be thinking about the next 10 years kind of thing, right? And again, none of this stuff is that groundbreaking, that innovative. I'm literally taking personal finance concepts and just applying it here. It's the same thing, right? It's crazy, but these things do matter. And this is that beneath what you see in the iceberg, right? This is that foundational stuff that a lot of this stuff is not talked about in the Amazon game. It's all just sourcing and sourcing and sourcing. I'm like, listen, at a certain point, yeah, that is the crux of making Amazon work. But you do got to learn the foundational stuff. You do need to learn accounting, at least best practices, so you're doing it right. Tax optimization, like hiring, like there are all these non-sexy things that do start to matter. And the businesses that can weather most storms have those things really figured out. And they can be the most boring businesses ever, but they can weather some storms. See, Carlos, this is my first time I joined. Wanted to say thank you for the session. Very valuable. We'll join more often. Appreciate it, Carlos. Thank you so much. Yeah, we got about 9-ish minutes here, so we'll start to wrap up. But any last minute questions, happy to dive deep into whatever. I'm just kind of rambling here, having some fun. But again, we do this every Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. EST. So make sure you join us. Don't feel like you have to wait to ask questions. Jump into live chat, all that good stuff. Get an onboarding if you haven't done it already. But we're always here to help. And listen, if you just want to come in to chat and vent, do it. We're here for you. We sometimes have people do that. Like, hey, I'm just going to vent. Awesome, man. Go for it. I'm here for you.
Yeah, we're always here to help with any, best practices or, if you have a strange situation coming up with Q4, happy to dive into that. If you're looking for any guidance that is Aura specific, I know I mentioned Finn was working on a 3 core strategies article that is now published and live in our help docs. It goes through essentially the 3 main strategies we recommend, starting with Maven, that buy box strategy being the second one, just a little bit more aggressive. And then third being a liquidation strategy. So that tends to cover about 70 to 80% of most listings scenarios and ways to reprice all of that. Obviously, that extra 20%, there's going to be a little bit more specification, maybe some special things you want to do there. But definitely recommend checking that article out. And if you need help building those strategies, feel free to come into chat. We'll be happy to kind of spin those up for you so you can take a look, see if they line up with your business goals and get those activated as well.
Yeah, and if you've seen me speak on like a live or a podcast, I tend to have like a go-to, which is like every one of you is in a different life cycle or a different phase of the same life cycle, right? When you first come into stock, you're kind of conservative on your pricing. You care more about profitability. But as time goes on, you become more aggressive in your price. Why? Because opportunity cost increases. You're holding it too long. Long-term storage fees become a concept. So what we try to do is say, okay, well, we have this kind of mental model for what you should do. Let's take those 3 phases in that life cycle and then say, here's phase 1's strategy, here's phase 2, here's phase 3, and then you can have it just built out super easily. So, we can build these out in your account very, very fast, which is nice. But yeah, we're trying to kind of conceptualize what we do a little bit more because at least in the repricing space, it's been do whatever you want. It's like, yeah, but dude, I don't have the data you guys have. I've been selling for 6 months. What do you mean do whatever I want? I don't know what to do. Yeah, makes sense. But we have all that data. And so we can see it at scale and say, okay, well, if we can generalize this down, we have a really good starting place for most sellers, which is really nice. Yeah. And obviously more advanced stuff, yeah, we talk about hyperdrive, you know, more different use cases for Maven, all that cool stuff. But yeah, it's nice. Like, you know, I'm grateful for how we built things, because especially with early stage, like you can now get started with the advanced modern repricer for $27 and not get dinged on any features or speed, which is crazy to me. And then also like grow with us, and you'd be doing 4 million a month like some of our users, and using LoRa, which is nice, right? So it's like we're not this like only for experienced advanced sellers or only for brand new unexperienced sellers. It's like, no, actually we built this in such a way it works for that whole cycle. It's awesome. Which took a lot of work. Took a lot of work to get there, but I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, at whatever stage, I mean, I help folks, like you said, 2 million per month in revenue, all the way down to 2 or 3K in revenue. So there
Yeah.
is a spot for everybody here within our doors. And yeah, we're always happy to help with anything, whatever it may be,
Yeah.
making sure listings are set up properly, recommendations on mins and maxes, how to reprice, all sorts of things.
Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up here for time. Keep an eye on your email if you're an Aura user. If you're not, you'll probably still get the notification somehow on social. We have a cool release coming out probably next week, realistically. Q4 related, can't share anything more than that, but you'll definitely see it, which we're very excited about. Something that hasn't been done in the Amazon space that I've seen in my time in this space in a decade. So very pumped for it. It's going to be really cool. But keep an eye out on your email for that notification. And with that, hopefully we'll see you next week. If you came, awesome. Reshare it, invite your friends, all that good stuff. We'll be here again next Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. EST. And we'll do this thing again. And hopefully there's no crazy new news to cover, which I'm hoping for. But awesome. We'll let you guys get back to the rest of your week. Enjoy it. Get geared up for Q4. It's here. We're in it, but we're just on the up ramp right now. We're not at peak yet. So get ready.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good week, folks.